Hey, hi, hello. You're listening to Chickling Chronicles, the show where spooky meets storytelling, where we peek under the bed not because we're fearless, but because if there's a monster under there, there's a good chance it's hot, brooding, and about to become a morally questionable love interest. I'm Courtney, your resident paranormal mystery author, wielder of dark plot twists, and the girl who wandered into the adult fiction section way too young and might have stayed for the haunted castles, the magical pining, and enemies who you really shouldn't kiss, but you definitely will. Today, I get to gush about one of my forever obsessions, Guilty Pleasures by Laurell K. Hamilton, the first book in the Anita Blake Vampire Hunter series, which means it's not just any old book on my shelf. It's not just any old book on my shelf. It's the haunted threshold that led me down a lifelong, dark, blood-smeared, fang-studded rabbit hole. This book has been with me so long, it's practically part of my origin story. I found it tucked in the stacks of my local library with a cover that promised secrets, shadows, and possibly inappropriate content from middle school brain, which of course only made it that more irresistible. But from that very first page, Anita's dry humor, her wary glances over her shoulder, her unapologetic attitude that said, "Yes, I raise corp for a living, what of it?" I was gone, utterly enchanted. It's one of those rare books I never outgrew. Even now, years and countless reads later, I still catch myself picking it up off the shelf just to revisit a favorite scene or pulling up the audiobook like it's comfort food, despite it being full of crime scenes, moral horror, and monsters who'd eat me for brunch. But hey, who needs normal comfort reads, right? Before we creep any deeper into the St. Louis back alleys, I want to make sure that you're subscribed or following the show. And if you end up loving this stroll through my twisted literary nostalgia, please leave a review. It helps the podcast grow, and it might keep the local master of the city from sending someone to check on us. All right, silver crosses, stakes, sarcastic one-liners loaded and ready. Perfect. Let's step into the dark. So, unlike a lot of the books that needed to earn my trust over a few cautious chapters, Guilty Pleasures had me, heart, throat, moral compass, and all, from line 1. I still remember being curled up in my bed, reading far past any reasonable bedtime, completely oblivious to the world outside of my book. Laurell K. Hamilton didn't just build a setting. She cracked the sky open and let all these deliciously terrifying creatures spill out. Vampires who didn't sparkle, who didn't mope, they played politics. They wore silk. They wielded centuries of manipulation like a second language. And Anita, she wasn't the breathless ingenue tripping over her heels into a vampire's arms. She was a 5-foot-tall powder keg with a gun, a necromancer's license, and absolutely zero patience for undead melodrama. The first time she refused to be intimidated, staring monsters down that would send anyone else screaming, I think a tiny goth part of my soul stood up and applauded. It wasn't just the action or the blood, though, let's be honest, that was pretty riveting. It was Anita's voice, her sarcastic, morally torn, fiercely loyal, constantly negotiating between compassion and the brutal practicality her job demanded. That's what made this book, and the whole series, feel alive in a way most stories never quite manage for me. Let's zoom out for a moment. We have 1993, Jurassic Park ruled the theaters. The X-Files was about to premiere. Anne Rice's Interview with the Vampire had already sunk its teeth into Gothic literature, and horror fiction was coming down from the Stephen King, Clive Barker boom. And there's me, living in Japan, loving life, and getting a few visits here and there into the library. While there, I really didn't see any shelves neatly marked urban fantasy. I don't even know if that terminology existed yet. If you wanted vampires, you went Gothic. If you wanted crime thrillers, you went Stephen King, Clive Barker. Paranormal romance, it wasn't the powerhouse that we have today. But Hamilton, she did something different. She smashed them together. We had noir grit, plus the horror gore, plus the romantic tension, plus the modern city setting. That kind of blend was almost unheard of at the time. She wasn't chasing a movement, she was really sparking it. By fusing horror and mystery with supernatural romance, Hamilton laid the groundwork for genre playgrounds we now take for granted. We have Charlene Harris's Sookie Stackhouse, Patricia Briggs' Mercy Thompson, Alona Andrews' Kate Daniels, and even my own story with Bria Sage. Anita Blake really truly kicked down the door in the early 90s for the whole urban fantasy combo that made everything look slightly different than it used to. And of course, none of this gothic joyride, the blood-soaked streets, the morally gray lovers, the delightfully inconvenient corpses, would exist without Laurell K. Hamilton herself, an author who didn't just write books, she cracked the very pavement of genre fiction and let something dark and thrilling seep through. A little bit about Hamilton. She was born in Arkansas but grew up in Indiana. She's feeding her young brain a steady diet of fairy tales and horror stories. Not the normal kind, the old ones, sharp-edged, and the ones where witches actually eat the children and curses aren't neatly undone by sunrise. There's really no wonder that this blend of wonder and dread became the secret sauce in all of her work. She then went on to study English and biology, which sounds like a random mashup until you realize how perfectly it prepped her for building worlds that are equal parts mythic and meticulously anatomical. In Anita's world, we have ancient vampires debating territory lines in velvet-draped halls, while she's cataloging blood spatter patterns and bone fragments like it's normal. It's that balance of poetry and precision that is exactly what makes the series feel both otherworldly and weirdly believable. And then before Anita ever strutted onto the page with her arsenal of guns and exasperated quips, Hamilton cut her teeth first on high fantasy with Nightseer. That novel planted seeds of dark power struggles and heroines wrestling with their haunted reflections. I wrote a book titled The Missing Reflections, so if you're interested, check it out. But it was in 1993 when she released Guilty Pleasures that she truly threw open the floodgates. By blending gritty crime with that supernatural horror and weaving in the earliest sparks of what we would grow into paranormal romance, Hamilton carved out a space that felt dangerous in a way that readers hadn't seen before. Her romances were never safe. They were never soft. They came with teeth. A vampire could be whispering poetry in one breath and tearing out a throat in the next. And it's that razor's edge between allure and terror that made every scene crackle with energy. Hamilton proved that a modern city could wear its mundane skin by day. Bustling coffee shops, car honking, people arguing over the best pizza slice, while after dark, ancient creatures convened in shadowy clubs to plot empires, sip from terrified donors, and decide which humans would survive the night. She showed us that monsters didn't have to be one-note villains. They could be alluring, magnetic, and even heartbreakingly sympathetic, all without ever losing their fundamental power to terrify. And maybe, most importantly, she gave us a heroine who wasn't some trembling damsel or wide-eyed innocent. Anita Blake, she's kind of prickly, wary, sarcastic, deeply conflicted, and still stubbornly clawing towards what she believes is right, even if her hands came away a little bit bloody. Hamilton was able to build a world where horror and humor walked kind of hand in hand down the same moonlit alley, and where love could be its own monstrous gamble. Alliances shifted like quicksand, and sometimes the best solution to your problem was to literally haul them out of the grave. And once she laid that foundation, writers and readers alike have been happily lurking in those shadows ever since. Now, let me be honest here. Once I stepped into her version of St. Louis, I was scared, honestly, but I didn't want to leave. So let's talk about what Guilty Pleasure is actually about beneath the crime scenes and the flirtatious threats. So this is a story that focuses on Anita Blake. who works as an animator, which in this world doesn't mean cartoons, but literally raises corpses to settle estate disputes or criminal cases. You need great Uncle Marvin to testify one last time? You call Anita. She'll have him up and mumbling through rigor mortis in no time. She's also a licensed vampire executioner, which sounds dramatic until you realize it's basically the last line of defense between humanity and things with fangs that don't respect polite do not kill signage. But then a string of vampire murders shakes St. Louis supernatural community. The local master of the city, Nicholas, who is simultaneously childlike and horrifying with the ancient cunning to match, demands that Anita investigate. Refuse it, and it's her neck on the chopping block, literally. But then enters John Claude, the very definition of dangerous charm wrapped in ruffles and silk shirts, with centuries of experience making mortals melt or cower as needed. Anita, being Anita, mostly wants to roll her eyes and shoot him, but even she can't deny this pull. What follows is part grisly whodunit, part dark dance of power. Anita digs through layers of supernatural politics, personal horror, and lines she swears she'll never cross until the plot leans in close, whispers something irresistible, and suddenly those lines aren't so solid. And here's why this book is still one of my literary comfort foods, despite all the blood and broken bodies. It's that it feels real. Not because vampires and necromancers actually roam our streets, though wouldn't that make local zoning meetings really interesting? But it's really because Anita's reactions are so human. She's terrified. She's grossed out, lonely, furious, or even guilt-ridden. And still, she's strapping on her weapons, cracking a joke, and kicking the story forward, even after all these rereads, because trust me, there have been many. I still get that a little electric thrill when Anita squares her shoulder against a nightmare twice her size, and then she makes the hard choice that costs her sleep, or maybe even a tiny piece of her soul, because it's the right one. It's a book I keep returning to, not just to watch her shoot monsters, but to watch her wrestle with who she's becoming. So I always have this segment where I ask, does it crawl or conquer? Or I'm trying to develop that segment. But with this book, I can't say that it ever crawled for me, not once. From the moment I cracked that library copy, it conquered. It laid claim to my imagination in a way only truly formative stories can, the ones that teach you on some deep, almost cellular level, what kind of tales you'll spend the rest of your life chasing. And so you know what? I'm going to take a quick detour, because rereading Guilty Pleasure as an adult with slightly more life experiences, definitely more caffeine dependency, and let's be real, some equally questionable taste in book boyfriends, had me realize just how deeply this book has imprinted on my brain. Like, it's any wonder that my personal romantic archetype isn't darkly charming, possibly undead, and has a tragic past that will absolutely ruin your sleep schedule because you'll stay up trying to psychoanalyze them. Thankfully, I have my husband, and he's a sweet, funny, charming person, but he's definitely not undead. And he doesn't have a tragic past that I'm aware of, but But if I had picked someone like that, I would fully blame Anita and John Claude for this. Or maybe I would thank them. It's complicated. Also, we need to take a moment to talk about Anita's savage comebacks. This woman will stare down something with the power to rip her limb from limb and still mutter something like, "Try it and I'll make your coffin upholstered with holy wafers." This was so iconic. My teenage self, preteen self, whatever, was taking notes thinking, yes, this is how we flirt. By threatening dismemberment, I got it. This wasn't like the normal things you would see on TV. Even coming with Buffy later on down the line, she was already a strong female. She was the Slayer, the chosen one. There was never a point in time where you would see someone like this. And she was just so strong. So if you ever wonder why I like to write characters who banter right on the brink of disaster, now you know why. Formative reading, folks. It'll do things to you. But let's get back on track and let's talk a little bit about what can writers learn. Well, if you're a writer or just a delightfully nosy creative soul who loves picking apart why certain stories sink their claws in and refuse to let go, there is so much to learn from Laurell K. Hamilton's overflowing bloodstreak toolbox. First, voice above all. As I've probably hinted at, Anita's voice is the lighthouse cutting through all the supernatural fogs in this story. It's not just her dry humor or her delightfully judgmental internal monologues. It's the vulnerability that slips out when she thinks no one's looking, the flash of guilt after she makes that ruthless call. You can hand Anita the most mundane material, tax codes, grocery lists, or the bylaws of her local HOA, and I'd still devour every word because it would drip with her impatience, her side eyes, and her grudging decency. Book, it's a masterclass in how to make a narrator indispensable. Hamilton doesn't waste energy making Anita likable every second. She makes her compelling, which is far more dangerous and far more likely to keep readers up at 2 a.m. Second, let's talk about how genre mashups are where the real tension and magic live. Because why would we settle for a tidy little horror story or a straightforward crime procedural or even a mild paranormal romance when you can set them all on a collision course and watch the sparks fly? Hamilton's genius is in that volatile overlap. You've got police interviews with the stench of old blood still clinging to the walls. Then you cut to Anita cleaning her weapons while a vampire lounges nearby, teasing her with 30 threats that might be more than playful. The horror amplifies the romance sharpens the horror, and the mystery, it threads it all together. That blend means your heart isn't just racing because of who did it. It's racing because you're not even sure what rules apply anymore. And that right there, that's narrative gold. Third is the world building, which should exist to serve your characters and not drown them. When you think of St. Louis, you don't necessarily think of the vampire councils, the shifting political alliances, a necromancer's licensing board, because of course bureaucracy is going to find its way. But Hamilton makes the world feel massive and lived in, but it never reads like an encyclopedia entry. Why? Well, because we learn about these things only as Anita bumps up against them. We know how vampire etiquette works because Anita is constantly cursing under her breath about it. We understand the suffocating terror of old power because Anita, she feels it in her bones and you feel it along with her. So she can't afford to downplay it, so neither can we. It's immersive because it's always filtered through personal stakes, frustrations, and fears. It's not just thrown at us like backstory or dialogue. It's something that we get to feel with her. Number 4 is going to be complicating your characters. Make it deeply, gleefully painful, please. Make them flinch. Make them compromise. Let them crack a grim joke 5 minutes after they've seen something unspeakable. Because that's how people survive. Anita can be petty. She's reckless, loyal to a fault, and brave in ways that look suspiciously like self-destruction. Yet, Hamilton never tries to scrub her characters clean. She lets them get muddy, makes them live with the consequences that stick to their ribs long after the dust clears. That's what transforms them from the clever plot devices into stubborn residents of our hearts. And one bonus, don't fear the moral tangle. Anita's biggest battles aren't always with the vampires. They're with her own lines in the sand, which keep getting redrawn as the stakes climb higher. Watching her navigate guilt, responsibility, desire, and sheer survival gives the story an aching gravity. So whether you're writing blood-soaked supernatural noir or a sunny rom-com set in a cupcake shop, I love cupcakes, remember, the more honestly you explore what it costs your characters to make their choices, the more indelible your story becomes. That's the dark little secret Hamilton book whispers to us and why we keep listening. Now, what about those who are just readers who just love stories and devour flawed characters and eerie corners? Well, Hamilton book reminds us it's okay, maybe even essential, to be drawn to stories that are messy. They need to test boundaries and explore powers, but not as some cartoonish good versus evil, but as a tangled, teeth-bared thing that can tempt or destroy. As readers, we get to follow Anita through her compromises and victories, watch her stand toe-to-toe with nightmares and whisper, I might be terrified, but I'm still here. It's weirdly comforting to live inside a story where the world is so dangerous, the monsters are so beautifully monstrous, yet the protagonist keeps showing up anyways, battered, snarky, but unbroken. It's a reminder that courage doesn't look clean, that love doesn't always come packaged in safety, and that sometimes the best way to banish the dark isn't to chase it off, but to step right into it with your flashlight and maybe a loaded Browning high power and see what secrets it's hiding. So whether you're a writer stitching new shadows into your own world, or a reader who just wants to be haunted by someone else, not by someone else, don't be haunted by someone, or a reader who just wants to be haunted by someone else's, Hamilton Stories gives us all permission to embrace the complicated, the frightening, and the beautifully flawed. All right, well, that's where we're going to close the coffin on Guilty Pleasures, at least for now. If this book also crawled into your chest and made a little nest of blood and sarcasm, please come talk to me about it. DM me on Instagram, drop a comment on YouTube, or tag me in your dark bookish takes. Tell me your favorite scene or who you'd absolutely not want following you down a dark alley. Plus, if you enjoyed this episode, I'd be ever so grateful if you left a review. And maybe toss in a blood emoji so I know you stuck through the entire gleeful vampiric rambling. And do not forget that my own personal mystery, The Missing Reflection, is out September 2nd. You'll find all the order links and my socials in the episode description. And if you're local to Jacksonville, North Carolina, I will be doing a signing on September 13th at the Lazy Daisy Bookshop. Please do not hesitate to stop in and come see me. Say hi, get your book signed. I'll appreciate it all. But until next time, keep creating, stay curious, and maybe keep a little garlic by your bedside just in case. See you in the next chapter. Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Chickling Chronicles. Make sure you like and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so that you never miss a story or a conversation. See you next time.